A global view, live from London, is City News International.
City News
City
International.
Internazionale.
City Noticias Internacionales.
Notícias Internacionais.
City News International.
Habari za City.
City 国际新闻。
This is City News International.
Good afternoon, I'm Lillian Fawcett.
And I'm Ellie Cook. Today's top stories. Leaked documents reveal some of America's super rich have paid almost no income tax in recent years.
Nicaraguan authorities arrest 4 potential opponents to President Daniel Ortega.
And later in the programme, a special report on human rights abuses in Ethiopia's Tigray region.
Some of the world's wealthiest people have paid little to no income tax, according to an investigation. Information leaked from the US Internal Revenue System, who are responsible for collecting taxes, revealed the tax returns of Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, among others. The report alleges that Jeff Bezos did not pay $1 in federal income tax in 2007 and again in 2011. He's now the world's richest man and was a multi-billionaire at the time. They did this through legal tax loopholes. The data was obtained and published by ProPublica, an investigative journalism outlet. Joining us live is Philip Baker QC, a barrister at Field Court Tax Chambers in London. Hi Philip, thanks very much for joining us.
Hello.
Hi. So how is tax avoidance on this scale legal?
Oh, it isn't necessarily tax avoidance. It's just that the US taxes income and these individuals are wealthy. That is, they own shares and other property. And if they simply own those shares and they increase in value, they don't get any income. The US doesn't have a wealth tax. There's some discussion at the moment as the possibility, but as long as you tax only income and you don't have any income, you don't pay any tax. So there isn't any avoidance necessarily involved here at all.
Right. So do you think that the US tax system therefore needs updating to acknowledge wealth as opposed to just income?
I think all countries' tax systems need updating, but the US tax system has been very much dysfunctional for quite a long period of time. It's been very dysfunctional with regard to multinationals, and you'll have picked up that there are attempts to get an agreement to have a minimum tax floor for multinationals, but it's also highly dysfunctional for individuals as well.
Right, and we've seen the G7 group of industrialised nations cooperate on an agreement on corporation tax this past week. Could income tax, in light of this, be the next big thing on the international agenda?
It's not really on the agenda. Companies have been on the agenda because politicians got embarrassed 7-8 years ago when there were reports that there were large multinationals earning big profits in countries and paying no tax there. And so that's been the focus. There's been very little focus on individual taxes, but just 2 weeks or so ago, very interesting report from the OECD about taxes on inheritance and wealth taxes. So that might be something that's coming over the horizon, and particularly with the huge costs of dealing with the COVID crisis.
Thank you very much, Philip. That's all we have time for. Great to speak to you.
Can I just, before I go though, emphasize one point to you, and that is you've been looking at the non-payment of tax, but the other issue is the fact that this is a leak of private information about tax.
Absolutely.
And that's an issue you ought to be looking at as well.
Sure. Thank you very much, Philip. That's all we have time for.
Okay.
Nicaraguan police have arrested 4 politicians, 2 of which may run against current president Daniel Ortega in elections later this year. Mr. Ortega will run for a 5th term in office, and his potential challengers were arrested under a treason law brought in by Ortega's government last December. Jorge Hinojosa has more.
Felix Maradiaga, an academic and political activist, Juan Sebastián Chamorro, economist and future candidate for president, These are the newest names added to the Nicaraguan government political hit list. They were arrested under a controversial law passed in December by Daniel Ortega government. They have been accused of crimes against the government, lecturer in politics and Latin American culture Francisco Carballo.
Ortega's government passed a law last year called the treason law. Anyone that has been a traitor to the country will not be allowed to run for office. And the problem here is that the definition of treason is extremely lax, and it's basically anyone that opposes the rule of the Ortega family is considered a traitor.
This arrest has attracted international attention and condemnation. The US has labeled him as a dictator, which is vastly different from his original freedom fighter image. Professor of Human Geography at the University of Edinburgh, Julie Couples has followed Ortega's numerous presidencies since 1979.
The condemnation of what's happened does not just come from the US. I mean, it comes from many other countries as well. Those that are opposed to the government often get characterized by the government as, golpistas. And so lots of people describe Ortega as a dictator and Nicaragua as a dictatorship. And those are voices on the left and the right. And what you've got in Nicaragua right now is an opposition that completely crosses the political spectrum.
These arrests are the latest steps in Ortega's campaign to be elected for a fifth time in office.
Our reporter Jorge Hinojosa there. Talks between the EU and the UK on trade through Northern Ireland have ended without an agreement. A decision could not be reached on how goods move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has asserted the UK's right to make decisions about issues concerning its territory.
What we're prioritising is the right and ability of the people of Northern Ireland to have access to goods and services from the whole of the UK, and we are working to ensure that we protect the territorial and economic integrity of our country.
US President Joe Biden said he is concerned the trade row could endanger peace in Northern Ireland. The remarks come ahead of Mr. Biden's first foreign trip as president, travelling to the UK for the G7 summit.
Over 100,000 people have been forced to flee violence and are at risk of starvation in Myanmar's eastern Kaya state. Tom Andrews, the United Nations human rights investigator for the country, said that the military were indiscriminately attacking civilians. Many are now hiding in the forest, cut off from food, water, and medicine. The military took control in a February coup and have violently cracked down on dissent since. Mr. Andrews called for urgent international action.
At least 20 protesters in Colombia have been killed by police during anti-government demonstrations, according to Human Rights Watch. The International Monitoring Group said 16 protesters were shot. 3 died from other injuries sustained by excessive use of tear gas. Another was killed after being beaten. Representatives from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights met with Colombian officials this week. Their president, Antonio Urejola, spoke at the meeting.
Our objective and ultimate goal is to collaborate on the strengthening of the institutionalization of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law from the perspective of inter-American standards on human rights.
Protests have taken place across Colombia since April. The demonstrators are calling for equal access to healthcare and education, as well as an end to corruption and police brutality.
Mongolians will elect their new president today after a scandal-rocked campaign. Outgoing president Koltmagin Batulga was barred by the ruling Mongolian People's Party for running for a second term. He responded by trying to ban the People's Party, which controls the parliament and is expected to win this election. Seb Braddock reports.
Mongolian voter Bayama Jargasi Khan thinks of this year's election as a soap opera.
It really sounds like just a, household drama, but it actually is. There's nothing in Mongolia goes by the rule. Everything is so messy.
It's certainly been nothing if not dramatic. The outgoing President Batulga is a former wrestling champion and strongman in both senses of the term. He leads the opposition Democratic Party. After he was barred from running for a second term, Democratic Party members of parliament went on hunger strike. Then, on YouTube Live, while standing in front of a yak tail, Mr. Baturga announced that he would try to outlaw the current government. He claims that the formerly communist Mongolian People's Party want to revert Mongolia to a Soviet state. But for Marissa Smith, a researcher at Berkeley University, Mr. Baturga is irrelevant.
I haven't seen people strongly voicing support for Batulga actually at all. None of the sort of factions have said anything about Batulga for a while, ever since the ruling really came down strongly that he was not going to be able to run for president. Everyone has just been totally silent about him.
The main worry is that years of corruption scandals have left many Mongolians uncaring towards politics. Zarig Batar Purve, a 27-year-old butcher in Ulaanbaatar, has little faith in today's election.
I don't like participating in elections. No matter who wins, all of them will embezzle behind our backs.
Despite widespread apathy, not everyone is as pessimistic. Bulan Batdar, a journalist and former employee at the Mongolian embassy in Canada, believes that Mongolia's democracy will emerge stronger.
It's evolving, not only the evolution of the parties or maturing of the parties, but as a society we're learning. We're learning that moving away from that democracy romanticism, and we're understanding the implications that democracy is not just everyone has rights, but also it means lots of fights, polarization, discussion, debate.
Caught between Russia and China, Mongolia's democracy may always be fragile. There is hope for Mongolia to move away from business as usual. That, however, may have to wait for a future election. Seb Braddock, City News International.
This is
City News. Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny's anti-corruption foundation is going on trial in Moscow. Government prosecutors accuse Mr. Navalny and his organisation, commonly referred to as the FBK, of destabilising Russia under the guise of liberalism. They say the FBK's opposition amounts to extremism and accuse the foundation of plotting an uprising with the support of the West. The FBK produces investigative reports published on social media aimed at uncovering corruption in the Kremlin. Earlier today, Thibaut Spialet spoke with the investigative editor of the Meduza project, Alexei Kovalyov. He asked what the trial means for the opposition in Russia.
Well, it's obviously politically motivated. And it's aimed at not just banning probably the biggest grassroots organization in Russia, but also, and this is very unusual even for Russia, retroactively disenfranchising everyone who's in any way connected to it. Because under the new law just signed by President Putin, anyone who has anything to do with an extremist organization will be banned from running for office for the next 3 or 5 years, depending on the status with the organization.
Last month, we saw your organization was labeled as a foreign agent, and now the foundation of Mr. Navalny might be described as extremist. Do these labels mean anything anymore?
They carry meaning. I mean, they are designed to discourage people from any contact with these organizations or people. Because for what it means for Meduza, for example, is that our sources that would earlier be very happy to talk to us, and some of our contributors as well, are afraid of writing for us or even being quoted in Meduza as an expert. Because these laws are so vague, and they're designed to be those, that they are very indiscriminately applied.
Is this the end of the opposition in Russia?
Well, it's certainly suffering a very heavy, if not a mortal blow. But hopefully the Russian civil society is more robust than just one very big organization. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. But hopefully, we don't know what's going to happen because it's an unprecedented situation. But there are other opposition organizations, including local ones, and maybe, just maybe, they will find it in themselves to kind of form a coalition. But then again, if we're talking about the Russian parliamentary elections of 2021, I don't think any opposition candidate will be allowed to run.
The formation of a pro-independence government in Catalonia has reignited questions about the region's future in Spain. President Pere Aragonès of the left-wing Esquerra Republicana de Catalunya party wants an agreement with the Spanish government on an independence referendum. But within Catalonia, opinion is divided. Jack Grogan-Fenn reports.
Pere Aragonès, Catalonia's new president, is a man on a mission to achieve independence from Spain and to do so through the means of a referendum. Here he is at the weekend, underlining his ambitions.
The solution to the political conflict is to vote and is freedom. It is to vote for the future of the country in a referendum.
Mr. Aragonès has formed a coalition government with a rival independence group, Junts per Catalunya, a bloc set up by former Catalan President Carles Puigdemont. Dani Cetra is a research fellow at the Open University of Catalonia in Barcelona. He suggests that the independence movement is facing some big internal challenges.
There are fundamental divisions, deep disagreements around strategy between this more pragmatist approach now led by Esquerra and the more maximalist approach led by Puigdemont. And there are also divisions within parties, especially within the Junts per Catalunya party. And there's another sector which is still significant, a significant minority, that says, well, we need continued disobedience.
In 2014 and 2017, independence referenda were held in Catalonia. This is the sound of pro-independence protesters shouting "We will vote" during an independence march 4 years ago in Barcelona. The Spanish authorities deemed these referenda unconstitutional and in 2017 clamped down forcefully on voters. Many pro-independence politicians were either arrested or went into exile. This included the then-president Carles Puigdemont, who fled to Belgium. Sebastian Balfour, a professor in Spanish politics at the London School of Economics, believes it is unlikely that Catalonians would want to go through with this process again.
The result of the, if you like, the political results, the banning of the government, the arrest of its members in October 2017, that has made it very difficult to support the idea of any unilateral path.
Balfour also suggests that despite there being a pro-independence government in power, this does not reflect broader public opinion in Catalonia.
It's very difficult to argue that Catalans want independence. They don't. Half of Catalonia wants independence, the other half doesn't. The secessionist parties have to face winning over the electorate that is reluctant to support independence.
The 2017 independence movement led to protests and a showdown with the Spanish authorities. The question now becomes, what results will this more moderate approach by Mr. Aragonès eventually yield? This is Jack Grogan-Fenn reporting for City News International.
Coming up later in the show, our East Africa correspondent Nila Nyakoa takes a deep dive into Tigray's humanitarian crisis.
You are listening to City News International, where we bring you the latest from all around the globe. Everything you need to know is right here, so just stay with us for more.
Welcome back. The time is 3:18 here in London. We'll now take a look at the latest global headlines with Charles Kershaw.
This is
City News.
On Tuesday, a group of undergraduates at Nanjing Normal University in China's Jiangsu province held a school principal hostage. They fear their degrees will be devalued when their school merges with a vocational institute, seen as less prestigious. Several students were injured after the police used batons and pepper spray on them. A judge has ruled that UK Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove's granting of a contract to friends of former Chief Advisor Dominic Cummings was unlawful. Justice O'Farrell stated that the awarding of the contract in June last year to market research company Public First gave rise to apparent bias. Both the Public First owners previously have worked for Cummings and Gove.
That was Charles Kershaw with the global headlines. Now we head to our weather reporter Piotr Przyborowski, who's in Poland.
Come rain or shine, we've got you covered.
City News International.
Hello, I'm here at the picturesque Lake Malta, very close to the city center of Poznań in Poland, where the European Canoeing Championship took place last weekend. Water sports enthusiasts dive in behind me as the temperature stays around 25 degrees Celsius, with not a single cloud in the sky. After widespread rain last month.
Piotr, I'm very sorry. We're having some technical problems there. Ellie, back to you.
It's been 7 months since the conflict in Ethiopia's northern region of Tigray erupted, leaving millions of people internally displaced. The Ethiopian government has been accused of human rights abuses, with the international community condemning the recent escalation of violence. In this programme, we take a closer look at the current situation, beginning with voices from the Ethiopian diaspora.
If I was there, it would be me. Girls are suffering a lot of raping.
Mary Hagers, an Ethiopian citizen, painting this gruesome picture. She is part of this group of people marching through central London to protest against a humanitarian situation that has been unfolding in northern Ethiopia since last year. Many here are from Tigray, but unlike majority of them, Mary hasn't been in contact with her family for 9 months. She doesn't know where they are.
My parents, my friends, everyone. I'm worried like as everyone else. I have seen in videos, kids being cut their hand, girls raped. It could be one of my sisters. That's every night I go to bed. I pray to God. Hopefully it finds them, but it's very hard.
But her story is just one of the reasons this protest is taking place today. Bus driver Fezeha Gezehan, like Mary, has got family back in Tigray, but he's lucky to still know their whereabouts. His anger, therefore, is directed elsewhere.
We're trying to let the world know every single second delayed is another child's life. We are asking the international community to take action right now because every second delayed is another destruction happening. This is actually illegal and genocidal. This worries us.
Nearly 7 months into the conflict, the Ethiopian government has been accused of orchestrating crimes against its own people. And this man claims the ongoing crisis could be dealt with if only the government did not get help from big corporations.
The Vodafone is just recently, they made a deal with the Ethiopian government to buy the Ethiopian Telecom for £850 million. And that money will be used to buy weapons and chemicals to murder and to contaminate innocent people.
Meanwhile, the United Nations is expressing their deep concern over what they termed as serious abuses in Tigray.
UK, act now!
That was our East Africa correspondent, Nila Niakoa, with that report. And she joins us now. Nila, that report there carries a lot of strong accusations. Do we know what the Ethiopian government is saying, or have they not responded?
Well, Ellie, the government there has dismissed any accusations against it, particularly accusations coming from outside Ethiopia saying it is a domestic matter. Now, they've also brushed aside any international calls for a ceasefire, saying its forces are close to eliminating the opposition. And of course, when they talk about the opposition here, they're talking about the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or rather TPLF, the ruling party in Tigray.
And we know that Ethiopia's neighbour, Eritrea, has been accused of exacerbating tensions in this conflict. What more do we know about the role of Eritrea?
Well, the TPLF is accusing Eritrea of deploying troops in support of Ethiopia's military. Now, we know that for months, both Eritrea and Ethiopia have categorically denied Eritreans' involvement, of course, contradicting testimonies from human rights groups, aid workers, and even diplomats. But finally, earlier in April, we saw that Eritrea actually confirmed that its troops are indeed fighting in Tigray. And in fact, a UN report due to be submitted to the General Assembly this month has confirmed that it's not just Eritrean troops who are present in Tigray. Somali soldiers have also been fighting alongside Eritrean troops and have been carrying out many of the worst abuses we are hearing about, like sexual violence and ethnic cleansing.
And what are human rights organisations saying about these alleged human rights violations? Just how bad is the situation?
Well, human rights organisations, including Doctors Without Borders and Amnesty International, have documented incidents of sexual violence, extrajudicial killings and massacres. And not only that, but organisations like the Human Rights Watch have also documented over 1.7 million internal refugees. So earlier I did actually speak with Letitia Bader, the Horn of Africa Director of Human Rights Watch, to give us a better picture.
I mean, there is now ample evidence of serious crimes which have been committed by the Ethiopian forces, by the Eritrean forces, by the Amhara regional forces in the western part of the Tigray region. In terms of the trends, I mean, we've documented both indiscriminate shelling of civilian property. Civilian infrastructure in the region has been devastated, and that's both from destruction during fighting. It's also because of widespread pillaging, especially by Eritrean forces, in hospitals, in schools.
So the United Nations has been warning that the region itself is on the brink of famine. How close are we?
The data which is coming out is clearly pointing to a potentially devastating scenario if the actions of parties on the ground, and that's been both ongoing restrictions on humanitarian actors' ability to move around, that there had been some improvements in the early 2021, January, February, more restrictions were put in place again, a lot of the main roads, massive checkpoints along the way, so humanitarian actors are having to negotiate not with one party to the conflict, not just the Ethiopian forces, but then the Eritreans. I mean, real impediments to access for aid agencies, but also for the communities.
Now, it's been, I think, 7-8 months of this crisis just unfolding. Do you see an end in sight anytime soon?
We are not seeing any improvements in terms of the human rights situation, despite more international pressure so far. And despite that, we have definitely seen the Ethiopian government acknowledge some of the trends, although, as I described, each time in the same breath, downplaying them as well. But we are not seeing a shift in terms of the types of abuses, the levels of abuses, the gravity on the ground.
That was Letitia Bader from Human Rights Watch speaking to our East Africa correspondent Nila Niakoa. We now go to the business world with Akila Kinyo.
World Business Today on City News International.
Good afternoon, I'm Akila Kinyo. El Salvador is the first country to make the cryptocurrency Bitcoin an official currency. The law was passed by Congress late Tuesday. It requires all businesses to accept Bitcoin transactions if their technology supports it. El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, said this would help financial inclusion. His government estimates that 70% of Salvadorans do not have access to bank accounts. The price of Bitcoin went up 5% after the announcement this morning. UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak is said to be pushing for a London exemption from the G7 global tax plan. The recently approved deal set out a global minimum tax rate for multinational corporations. Close sources told the Financial Times that Rishi Sunak is worried about the tax's impact on global banks with headquarters in London. They expect him to push this at future meetings and suggested that EU countries are in similar position. That's all from me. It's back to you, Lillian.
Thanks, Akila. Now, from meetings to mammals. A kangaroo is on the loose in northern Denmark after escaping from a campsite. Sanja Skov has more on the story.
It's fast and it jumps up to 25 feet, which makes it especially hard to catch. A 6-month-old kangaroo has been on the loose since last month from its home on a campsite in northern Denmark. Birte Pedersen, who owns the campsite, told me he is young and curious. They failed to catch him twice, but she's hoping 3rd time's lucky. They have one more kangaroo that she says is missing her friend. Miss Pedersen also wishes people would stop calling the police every time he shows up in their backyards and assures that he is harmless.
Now, I don't know about you, Ellie, but that's really put a spring in my step.
It sure has.
And now for a reminder of today's top stories.
Leaked tax returns reveal that some of the world's richest people are avoiding billions in income tax.
Nicaraguan authorities arrest 4 political challengers to President Daniel Ortega.
And millions in Tigray have been displaced as a result of alleged human rights abuses by the Ethiopian government.
That's all we have time for today. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Lillian Fawcett.
And I'm Ellie Cook. Thank you for joining us and goodbye.
News from around the world. This is City.
City News International.